left on the page. I figured. Okay. Good. We have enough.
I think we have enough.
Yeah.
Extra. Anybody else
there?
needs? We have over here.
The lady's got back there.
I think we have enough.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so it sounds funny to start getting ready for Tisha B'Av, but it is true. You have to start getting ready for Tisha B'Av. And either way, either we're fasting or we're celebrating a Yontif. Either way, you have to get ready for Tisha B'Av. And either way, Tisha B'Av is about Geula and about Moshiach. And everyone knows that the Rambam established 13 Ikar Emunah, 13 principles of faith. And one of them is to believe in the concept of Mashiach, the concept of Geula. And it's well known, the Rambam, he didn't use these words per se, but it was developed off of the Rambam, that a person has to believe in Mashiach, we believe in Mashiach. And even though it takes a long time, despite the length of time, I still hope for Mashiach, I still wait for Mashiach. The Rambam himself writes, when he formulated the 13 principles, that not only does one have to believe in the concept of Geula and Mashiach in order to be considered a religious Jew, the Rambam says that part of the belief is that you have to be hopeful for it. You have to anticipate it's coming. So this idea of Mashiach coming as soon as possible, it could be any second. So we know that in the language of Chazal, it's based on a pasuk in Navi. Let's give you a little background, then we'll begin to talk. So there's a pasuk in Navi which describes the coming of Mashiach as Bi'it Achishana. Bi'it Achishana. Simply translated, Bi'it Achishana, in its time, I will hasten it. So obviously, it's a conflict in terms. Is it in its right time or not? So the way Chazal interpreted it is as follows, that there is a predestined time, that the Rebbeinu Shalom from the beginning of time, from creation itself, ordained. This is going to be the moment of Geula. There's a Be'ita. There is a moment of when Mashiach is supposed to come, and no matter what happens, that's going to take place. That's called Be'ita. But Chazal say, Achishana means, Im Zochu, the Klal Yisrael or Zoicha, simply, I guess, from the time they were little, it meant if we're all whole, we do mitzvahs, and so on. So Achishana, so there's an Indian that Mashiach could come early. Okay, so there's Be'ita, there's a predestined time for Mashiach to come, if we're not Zoicha. But if we are Zeicha, then it's Achishana, it could come early. Okay, that's an idea that we know, that we're familiar with. Fine. Now, a childish way of thinking about Mashiach and thinking about Golos B'chalal it would be the following thing. If everyone's a good boy and girl, so we have a Beis Hamikdash, everything's fine. We're bad boys and girls, so Hashem throws us into exile, which is one big punishment. And Hashem is just waiting for us to do tshuva and to become good boys and girls again. And so, for whatever reason, Hashem in His compassion decided that this punishment that's called Galus is only going to last a certain amount of time. At some point, Mashiach is going to come, whether we like it or not, whether we deserve it or not. But if we're good boys and girls, Hashem will make it early. It's just like a reward type of thing. So, it's coming at some point, because Hashem, the plan is for Mashiach to come. But if we're Zaycha, if we do mitzvahs, like everything in life, we do good things, Hashem gives us good things. So Mashiach will come early. That's a childish, underdeveloped way of thinking about Geula, thinking about Mashiach. Let's understand. And when we, the next couple minutes, when I explain a little bit of what the coming of Mashiach means and what does it take for that to happen, then this idea of Mashiach coming early is a pella. It's a very difficult sugi, a very difficult concept to understand. How is it possible for Mashiach to come early? Again, when we talk about Mashiach, so if Mashiach is just a gift, it's like, okay, people need parnasa, they need health, so we need Mashiach. So it's a gift that Rebbeinu Shalom can give. When does He want to give it? He give whenever He wants. So if we're not Zaycha, He has a certain time when He's going to give it. If we're Zaycha, Hashem gives it early. It's if it's just a matana min hashamayim. That's not what Geula is. The coming of Mashiach, the way to conceptualize it is in the following way. Mashiach ushers us into an entirely new chapter of world history. Mashiach is not the end, right? Like when Mashiach comes, okay, then everyone just sits back and we just do nothing. Mashiach is the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter that's called Yemaisa Mashiach, which has its own avodah. And then even Yom Mashiach is really just a doorway and a hallway into another chapter. It's called Olam Haba, Tchias Amesim. And the rule is, the way it works is, when you're reading a book or something, to get to chapter 2, you have to finish chapter 1. So what is this idea of B'chlav? There's such a thing as like a predestined time. Hashem decided there's going to be a certain day, a certain moment in world history. That's the Be'ita. That's when Mashiach is supposed to come. If Mashiach is just a gift and it's something that Hashem just in His kindness wants to give you, like Parnasa, then what does it mean that it for sure has to happen at this point? The answer is that every single moment in time, like I mentioned this, I've mentioned this many times, is that we say in davening, every single moment, the Rabbanu Shalom is recreating the world. Every single moment of life and of world history shouldn't just be seen as, okay, the same basic world, just, second number 1 or second number 2, second number 3. Every single second of world history is a new page in that chapter that's called world history. And the Rabbanu Shalom made it in such a way that, and there's a language that the Mekubalim use, but for our simple purposes, every single page of history, which means every single moment in time, has a particular avodah, has a particular, what the Mekubalim use a language of, a spark of Elokus, a spark of divine presence that needs to be uplifted. Right? There's an idea in Sfarim, we talk about this, that throughout a person's life, the job of a Jew is to be mal in Nitzutzei Kedusha, to raise up sparks of holiness. As if you're going through the world and there's like a heap of ash, and in there's like a spark, you have to find it. That's a language that the Mekubalim use, and the meaning of that is that every single moment in time and every single experience that we have is, by its very definition, mixed up with, it has unbelievable potential for something holy, for something to be accomplished, for something good to come of that moment, but it's untapped potential. And very often, if it's not just untapped potential, it's all mixed up with all sorts of possibilities for negative experiences. And the job of a Jew is to go through, avodas Hashem means to experience, to get to the whatever page of that book of history of your life and the world history that you're up to, is to perform that avodah, to find that spark, to find God's presence in that particular moment, whether that particular moment means to daven, whether it means to give tzedakah, whether it means to say a kind word, whether it means not to do an avera, whatever the avodah of that moment is, whatever that avodah is, that means that's something there's a spark of God's presence that's dormant until you come and raise it. And when you do your job, then you move on to the next page. And at some point, when all the pages are finished of chapter 1, then you can move on to chapter 2. So what does it mean? What is this idea that Mashiach, there's a be'ita, there's a particular moment when Mashiach has to come? That's the moment when all the pages of chapter 1 are finished. And you can't rush things. We don't have an ability to make time go quicker for ourselves in such a way. So you have to go through each moment. And by the way, and if there's a page of life that a person, let's say, passed by without doing that avodah, then there's such a thing that's called tshuva. And tshuva means not just Hashem forgives you. Tshuva means that on a spiritual level, I've spoken about this a number of times as well, in other situations, that on a spiritual level, your neshama literally returns to that page and performs its avodah. Like I mentioned this once, that according to Rashash, there's different kavanas that a person has, different meditations, different divine names to think about when you perform different mitzvahs. So according to Rashash, if a person, let's say for example, had an opportunity to do a mitzvah and didn't, and 2 years later they're doing tshuva on that moment, the Rashash said that when you do tshuva for that lost opportunity 2 years later, then you have the kavanah for that mitzvah that you didn't do 2 years ago. Because it's not the pshat that you're just saying, I'm sorry, and Hashem says, okay, I won't punish you. No, it means the Rabbanu Shalom saying, okay, you go through the process of halachic tshuva. The Rabbanu Shalom now gives you a time machine, and he gives you access to that page, which on a human level you can't go back to that page anymore. On a physical level, it's 2 years ago. But spiritually speaking, you go back to that page and you're able to fix it. But this is what life is. Every single Jew and collectively, individually, we go from page to page, redeeming and raising up these sparks. And when all the sparks are raised up, and a spark can be raised again by doing the mitzvah properly, by doing if an opportunity is missed, doing tshuva, or God forbid a person going through punishment, That's also a way of raising up that spark. That's not for now how that works, but that's also a process through which the spark can be raised of that particular page. But however the process is, the page is accomplished, you move on to the next page. All the pages are done. That's the end of chapter 1. And that's what it means, the coming of Mashiach. Coming of Mashiach means, okay, you finished your avodah of Galus. All the pages of Galus have been read through, and they've been accomplished. Now you move on to the next period. The next chapter is called Yemais Mashiach. That's called Be'ita. Mashiach is not just this gift that's waiting, that's dangling like Parnasa. That's the reality. The reality is chapter 1 leads to chapter 2. So that's what Be'ita means. But now the question is, one second, so if that's what Be'ita means, then how is it at all possible for Mashiach to come any earlier than that? For Mashiach to come any earlier than that, that means that you're skipping pages. And that means that the experience of Gula and your understanding and appreciation of chapter 2 is going to be limited by the fact that you didn't finish everything in chapter 1. So again, if Mashiach is again just like a gift that's hanging and dangling in front of us, okay, fine. So whenever it comes, it comes. But when we understand what Mashiach is and what Gula means, then and which is why there's such a thing as Mashiach having a predestined time, because it means at that point all the pages of chapter 1 are done. Then what does it mean Achishan? What does it mean early? So this is a question if those that have good memories. A few months ago by Yashal Shudas, I mentioned this question.
You're saying that it doesn't mean a time, it means when it's done. It's not a specific time.
That's the specific time.
Point in time.
That's the specific time. But that point in time is because all the pages of Golis are finished at that time. So how could it be early? So I mentioned, I'll chazer over quickly what I mentioned in that Shal Shudas, and then we'll spend, not the rest of the night, but till Meyer, let's put it that way, and next week to expand and to explain. So we're not going to get to the bottom of the sugya tonight, but at least we'll begin tonight, and Bez Hashem next week we'll be able to hopefully get to the bottom of it to whatever degree possible. So I mentioned like this, Chazal say such a language that, there's different times, different kufas where it's more mesugel, so to speak, for the coming of Mashiach. Chazal say such a lashon that Ben David, that Mashiach comes b'matzoi Shvius, the year after Shemitah, which is this year, right? Last year was Shemitah, this year is after Shemitah. So it's a mesugel dika time for Mashiach to come. Now every single thing that we find in Chazal statements like that, they're not just predictions, they're avodah. In other words, whatever the year is, even if it's not a year after Shemitah, there's an avodah that's called a Shemitah deka avodah, and after a person embraces a Shemitah deka avodah, then Mashiach can come. So what is this inyan of Mashiach being dependent on having gone through a Shemitah? What is it about Shemitah that's associated with Mashiach? So it's like you don't have this in front of you, but just listen. In Parshas Bahar, when the Torah talks about the Parsha of Shemitah, so the Torah says like this. It says in Pasuk that in the 7th year the farmer shouldn't work and so on. And Pasuk says, that you'll do this. And the Rebbe Shem says it'll be good for you. The land will be protected. It'll be fine. So it says like this: V'nosna are its period. The land will give its produce. V'achaltem l'sayv, you'll eat. You'll be satisfied. V'yishatem l'vetechala, you'll sit with at peace. Everything will be fine. You keep Shemitah, it's going to be fine. Then the pasuk says like this: V'chisoimru, and if you're going to ask, Ma noichel v'shan hashviyas, so you're going to ask, what am I going to eat in the 7th year? I'm a farmer. I'm not working my field. So what am I going to eat in the 7th year? Hein lo nizr v'lo nesav to a sin. I'm not plowing. I'm not planting. I'm not gathering my crops. What am I going to eat in the 7th year? So Hashem says, don't worry. The answer is, says Hashem, I'll take care of it. I'll give a special bracha in the 6th year. The 6th year will produce enough crops for the 6th year, for the 7th, and the 8th. Because by the 8th year comes, you're going to be busy working the land, you're not going to have any produce. So the 6th year will have the 6th year's produce, 7th and 8th, and it'll be fine. That's what the pasuk says. So the first ask the obvious question. First of all, B'chalal, why is the Rebbeinu Shalom anticipating such a question? Maminim Yidden are Maminim, so why is the Rebbeinu Shalom anticipating us having a kasha? How can we handle the mitzvah of Shvius? But more than that, right before that, the pasuk already said, Hashem said, V'nas Narth Piria, the land will give its produce, you'll eat, you'll be satisfied, and I'll take care of things. And then if you're going to ask, what are we going to eat in the 7th year? I just told you, everything's going to be fine. So what's the pasuk talking about? So there's a vart from Rav Levi Eger. It's another farm too. Rav Levi Eger says the following thing. I think that's the one I quoted it from, by that Shal Shudas. So he says like this: the question that the Torah is anticipating is not a question of what are we going to eat. The Torah is already, first of all, the Rebbeinu Shalom has, he expects more of us than to ask that type of question, and he already said he's going to give us Paris. So that's not the question. The question is, well, what about the Nitzutze Kedusha? What about the sparks of holiness that would have been produced by those fruits of the seventh year? In other words, like I said, every single experience in life is another page, is another piece of this world that you need to raise up a spark, to actualize a potential. And so every single time a farmer works his field, that's also an avodah. And there's sparks being raised and being elevated and potential being actualized in ruchnius in that moment. And then when he puts all of his hard effort in to the land and so on, and he takes it out and makes a shak on the hates on the apple, so that's also raising a spark. So the question is now, what are we going to eat? We know what we're going to eat. The question is, what about the avodah of all the Paris of the seventh year? That's the question.
Can you ask the same question about non-kosher food or anything else?
So non-kosher is also, but that's we've spoken about that other times as well, and that is a question. How are those sparks raised from things that we don't have contact with, or we're not allowed to have contact with? That's a good question. But for these purposes, that's the question over here, because the seventh year's produce is something that they would have a shaykhs to, and normally they would. But now all of a sudden we're not going to be allowed to. So how could we raise it up? So to that, the Rebbeinu Shalom is giving an answer, a chiddush, which is that the sixth year's Paris that somehow magically when it comes to the mitzvah of Shemitah, something new happens, which is that sparks of kedusha that are in future pages that have not yet come to be, somehow miraculously are able to be brought early. They're able to be brought early. And says the pasuk, in the sixth year, you're going to have Paris of the sixth, of the seventh, and of the eighth. It doesn't mean just the amount of fruit. It means whatever nitzutze kedusha, whatever sparks of holiness that would have been, and that are in the seventh year, untapped, and in the eighth year, it comes early in the sixth year. And when you eat the Mika ha'etz on an apple the sixth year, that's not just an apple the sixth year, that's an apple the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth. And so when it comes to and that's what the pasuk is saying. That's the bracha of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that there's things that are going to be brought early. So based on this, what we see from Shvius is this potential, that there is such a possibility of, even though the normal way we have it, al pi derech teva. And when I say teva, I don't just mean physical nature. I mean even ruchniistic in nature. That ruchniistic in nature dictates that this moment is this page, and the next moment is another page, and you can't skip, and you can't do it early. Comes the mitzvah Shemitah's Megala side, reveals a secret that there is such a thing as what has to be done later on, actually to be given, and there's potential for it to be done earlier. This is why Ben David comes with Matzai Shvius, because the secret of Shemitah is not just for Paris, but the secret of Shemitah is the secret of Achishan. That something that has a be'ita, that be'ita can be accomplished also Achishan. And so this is what we're going to try to figure out a little bit tonight and more next week. So the Rebbeinu Shalom is Magal, this is the Chiddush when it comes to Shemitah. Fine, such a thing is possible with the Paris of Shemitah. The question is for us, Derech Avodah. Because if we want Mashiach to come, Achishana, which is what we want, we don't want to wait for Be'ita, so that means that we have to somehow figure out in our Avodas Hashem how to make our Avodas Hashem Shemitah-dik. If we can make our Avodas Hashem Shemitah-dik, it means that we can make pages that have yet to come, bring them early. And if those pages come earlier, then you're speed reading and it goes quick, and then Mashiach can come Be'ita Achishana. Be'ita Achishana, and that's the simple pshat and pasuk. In other words, it started off with, a pasuk. It comes in its right time early. So what does it mean? Is it the right time or is it early? Which one is it? The answer is, in Pnimius, both. Achishana is not, it's Be'ita Achishana. It's Be'ita Achishana. It's the right time early. So how do we do that?
But I'll say that in Christmas that everything mirrors that. There is a reality by the sign that we were taken out before.
Yeah, and that's why it wasn't a Gula Shlema.
So is that possibility?
So that's what we're going to try to figure out. How do we do it in such a way where it'll be
But the thread is there.
Yes, you have to see. We got
Cheshena here is much, but the longest understanding is that it happened in 60. Why is it matzah? If the Nitzotze Kedusha are all harnessed earlier ahead of time and to be extracted in the 6th year, that basically you're taking out all those avodas. Why is it Matzah Shvius? Why shouldn't it be Erev?
Once a person,
Erev Shvius.
no, because the point, Shvius is just the example. In other words, when we process the inyan of Shvius and we apply it to our lives, that will produce a Mashiach early.
For Matzah Shemitah.
Once you go through a Shemitah, in other words, you integrate within your Avodah what Shemitah means. I'm not talking about fruit. I'm saying, but you integrate what Shemitah means and you apply that, then you'll get Mashiach. Okay, so let's go back. Let's begin. So you have the Marmakoms in front of you. So as far as I know, in the Kisvei Ari, I'm not familiar with any place that the Rizal specifically or clearly talks about this Inyan, but there is one place where he at least hints to it, and so let's read it together. We're not going to be able to figure it all out tonight for sure, but again, we'll begin. Okay, so this is from Shar Kavanis in the section on Kriya Shema. Okay, so we're not going to be able to understand some of this, okay, but we'll do what we can. It's good to tonight's already Rosh Chodesh Av, right? So the Rizal's yard site is Hey Av, so should be so the Rizal says like this. Again, just the words. V'hinei Hamalchus Nikra Sukkos David Hanefeles. We know that we say in Sukkos that we daven that one of the languages that we have for the coming of Mashiach, we want for Mashiach to come, we want for the Shechina, for the divine presence to be revealed and to have a coveted place in this world. So it's called Sukkos David Hanefeles, the Sukkah of David that has fallen. So that description of the Sukkah of David that has fallen, that's a description of the Shechina in Galus. So he says like this: Malchus means the Malchus of Hashem. Nikra Sukkos David Hanefeles. Why is it called the one that fell? Because through our Averis, the Shechina has descended in Galus, and Hashem's covenant is in Galus. So we were the ones through our Averis brought Galus. So we have to rebuild that sukkah with our Ma'asim Tovim. Our Averis Chas v'Shalom take down the sukkah. And our mitzvahs raise up the sukkah. Okay. Vim came. So said the Riyah Kadosh like this. Ata So said the Rizal, there's a problem. And again, what he's hinting to is this problem of Be'ita Achishana. If you want to just wait for Be'ita, okay, you wait. But if you want to actually build up the sukkah and make Mashiach come early, then there's a problem. The only people that can harness this power of Shemitah, like I mentioned before, he describes them as tzaddik and gemurim, asher nishmesem kedoshos utaharis, that their neshamas are holy and pure. Sheishlam koich lalos ad makom ima. That's the language that the Rizal uses, that their neshamas are so pure and holy that they're connected and they're able to ascend to that place, that madrega that's called ima, that's called the mother. Again, we're not getting to the Kabbalah terms right now. Maybe next week we'll go back to explain what that means. But again, what the Rizal is saying is that neshamas that are holy and pure and have this unbelievable spiritual strength, so they could be the ones to do this. They could be the ones to make the sukkah built without it waiting for the right time for just to happen on its own. To do it preemptively and early, you have to have big neshamas for that. And because these neshamas are very rare, Hagalas misakev u'misarech, so Galus takes a long time. Because it's very, very few neshamas that have such a potential. If you had people, and a significant amount of people that had neshamas like that, the Mashiach would come quickly. You could have an achishana. But the reason why it hasn't happened yet is because neshamas that could access that strength, that koyach of achishana, and connect to that shemitah quality, like I mentioned before, very rare. But due to our own flaws and so on, we don't have neshamas like this. So that the Mashiach takes a long time, and it seems like we're waiting for Be'ita. And Ad Kidei Kach, the Rizal says that most of the difficulties in Tsaras of Galus, Habayis al Adam, that come to a person, is because of this problem that we don't have neshamas that are strong enough spiritually to make Achishan. So that's a terrible thing. So what's the Eitzah? Al Kol Zeh Yesh Ksas Tikun. So this is where Rizal gives the Pesach. The Rizal says there is a little bit of a Tikun that even for the average neshama, right, the average yid could access this inyan of achishana that normally should take a big neshama, but even an average neshama can do it. Through a person saying Kriya Shema, through the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. That's the context of what he's talking about over there. Through the mitzvah of Kriya Shema, that by being kind of the mitzvah of Kriya Shema properly, which comes with thinking about being Meiser Nefesh for Hashem and so on, and saying Kriya Shema, that's a way how every Yid can access this inyan of Achishana. Kal Yidei Kain, Afilu Ein Banu Shum Maisim Toivin. He says, Akadei Kach, even if a person, forget not having a big neshama, a person doesn't have any mitzvahs, mamish nothing, V'yishanu Ad Lahafli, and the person has Averis Ad Lahafli, a wondrous amount of Averis. Hina Al Yidei Mesiras Nafshenu Lahariga, through having in mind to dial Kiddush Hashem, when you say Kriya Shema, Meskaprim of Anesenu Kulam, all of one's Averis are forgiven, that's already Kedai to know. V'yesh Banu Yichoyles La'alois Ad Ima, and you could access that strength of big neshamas to go to that place of Ima, whatever that is, to access Achishana and to bring Mashiach early. That's the Yisai. So that's what the Rizal says. So this is what we're going to try to figure out for the next little bit, at least to begin the sugya, which is, okay, what exactly is this kayach of Achishana, of Shvius? And that, like the Rizal says, normally it would take only big neshamas to do that. And what is this inyan of Kriya Shema that even the average person can accomplish that? So the way, the derech that we're going to take is, eventually we're going to make our way to the Vilna Gaon, I would hope, but the path is going to be through the Baal Tanya. So there's a number of places in the Baal Tanya's writings where, again, I can't say he talks about this in particular, but a certain sugya comes up, and I think it's very, very relevant. Okay, so Marmukah number 2, this is a piece from the Baal Tanya in Torah R. This is a sefer on Chumash, on Bereishis and Shmos. So this goes back to the very beginning of Chumash. As everyone knows the story that Adam and Chava, okay, they're told not to eat from the Eitz Hadas. They eat from the Eitz Hadas, and then the Rebbeinu Shalom says, oh, now that they ate from the Eitz Hadas, and now they're mortal, right? So Hashem says, as the pasuk says, Hashem says, now that they're mortal, they know Taiv and Ra and so on. So now Pen Yishlach Yodai, maybe he's going to go and eat from the Eitz Chaim and live forever. So what does Hashem Yisparach do? So Hashem kicks him out of Gan Eden, puts up Malachim there to block the entrance back into Gan Eden, so then he won't be able to eat from the Eitz Chaim. So the Baal Tanya over there in Parshas Bereishis is dealing with the following question: what's so bad if they eat from the Eitz Chaim? I mean, the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted us to live forever, right? So fine, we made a mistake. We ate from the Eitz Hadas, and now Nebuch, we're mortal. But that was not the Rebbeinu Shalom's intention. He wanted us to live forever. So what's so bad if we eat from the Eitz Chaim now? No, now the Eitz Chaim is off limits. The Eitz Chaim wasn't off limits before. The Eitz Hadas was off limits. Now that we ate from the Eitz Hadas, now the Eitz Chaim is off limits. What's the problem? So the Baal Tanya says like this. The Baal Tanya says, a little bit of introduction, he says as follows: even before Adam ate from the Eitz Hadas, there certainly was such a thing as Ra in the world. There was the Nachash, right? The Nachash didn't come after the Eitz Hadas. The Nachash was there, which means there was such a thing as Ra in the world. Not only was there such a thing as Ra in the world, but there was whatever Aravaida is, like I described before, of being Mal and Tzutza Kedusha, to raise up sparks of Kedusha, Adam and Chava had to do that too. They were in the big leagues and we're in the minor leagues, so they were doing it on a much higher and more intense level. And what their Avodah and what they had to do to raise these sparks is different than what we have to do now. But they also had this Avodah. So said the Baal Tanya, so what exactly changed now that they ate from the Eitz Hadas? It's not that now that there's evil in the world. There was always evil in the world. And it's not like now there's an Avodah that you have to contend with evil and raise up Kedusha and do mitzvahs and not do Averis. That was also true. So what exactly changed? It's down that we're now mortal. But what's the cause of that? So it says the Baal Tanya like this. So the Baal Tanya says, once Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, so v'nis'arev bara. The Baal Tanya, again, before this, he has larger arichas about this, but this is the essential difference. So the Baal Tanya, before the eating the Eitz Hadas, of course there was Ra, and of course there was Avodah, but Ra and evil and Hester Panim and everything associated with the Nachash was external. It was something that Adam and Chava conceptualized, and like they understand conceptually such a thing as Ra, but it wasn't a Netias HaNefesh. It wasn't something that was inside of them that they were drawn to. It wasn't part of their consciousness and truth. It was something that you think about, you learn about. I learn about the astronomy and so on. So it's an idea. I don't become a star, But by Adam and Chava, by eating of the Eitz Hadas, then Toiv and Ra became part of their essence. In other words, because they ate from the Eitz Hadas, Toiv and Ra, then every single page, right, of life that they're going to have to contend with, and all the Eitz Haras and difficulties that come in that page, this is now an internal struggle. And what they're now having to do in that particular page is not just deal with an outside force. They now have to grapple with an inner confusion and an inner dialectic and an inner pull to do different ways, and it becomes much more of an internal avoida. It was this. Though it is true that before the Eitz Das also they would have to contend with Ra, and they would have to do mitzvahs and allow potential of every moment to be manifest and to materialize 100%. But the struggle and who they're contending with and who's pulling against that was all external. Comes after the Eitz Das, it's an internal struggle, and the Ra that every page also has before it's worked through starts off as a part of Adam and Chava themselves. Das is kashrus. Das is kashrus, right? Eitz Das Tovra. Oz Amar. So said the Baal Tanya. After again, Achashik Kfar Toa Me Eitz Das Tovra V'Nis Ariv Bara, and Ra became mixed up in Adam. Oz Amar. Now the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Pen Yishach Yadav V'Lokach Gam Me Eitz Achayim V'Ochav V'Chay Loyal. Now I don't want him to eat from Eitz Achayim. Why? Pirish Shechoshesh Oid Me'ata Shekfar Nis Ariv Bara, because now that Adam and Chava have been redefined and reoriented, their entire makeup has now become, all the Ra of every single page that they would ever experience is now a part of them. There's something about the Eitz Chaim. We're not going to go into this so much right now, but there's something about that tree, that in the Eitz Chaim, which it would cause things to live forever. It's not just a matter of the body living forever. Whoever is eating it, that's forever. That's a forever moment. And so, if now the Adam and Chava are made up of this inyan of Tov and Ra, and they eat from the Eitz Chaim, then they will be always remaining this mixture together forever. There's a hepech hakavana, and that's not the intention at all. In other words, what we'll see in a second, this inyan of the Eitz Chaim means an unbelievable influx of divine energy and chiyas and power and life. But who is that life given to? So before the chait, then all Adam is Tov. So then who's receiving the Chaim is Tov. But now that Adam and Chava are mixed up between Tov and Ra, now who's receiving that Tov is not just the Tov, the Chaim is not just the Tov, but it's also the Ra. So he says, "V'zehepech hakavana," and this would be the opposite of the Rebbeinu Shalom's purpose. That's the opposite of the Tachlis. Shreit Tzarech Liyas, what we want is Bal Hamalas Lenatzach. There should not be any death, and death is a derivative of Ra. Shiov Yarta Hara. We want to get rid of Ra. Kamaimer Arisha Kulat Kashim Tech, like we see in Davening B'Yom Neroim. We want evil to dissipate. Shezei Yil Ma'aseh Mashiach, and that's what we're working towards Mashiach, to get rid of Ra page by page. So now that's what the Baal Tanya says. Now he continues. And this process of now being unable to receive the immense influx of divine light and energy that's called the Eitz Chaim, because of all the Ra that we're mixed up with, this now defines the Avodah going forward. Throughout the entire period of Galus, so now it's not just a matter, we can't just sit back and draw light into our lives, because when we draw light into our lives, guess what? Where's it going? It's going into good places, but it's also going into bad places. So a prerequisite or a partner with that light that we draw down is that we first have to go through a process that's called birurim, of sifting, of clarifying ourselves, of getting rid of evil. And once we get rid of evil, so now then you could experience something good through your avodah. But it has to be in such a way. The kach tzarech liyas, and this is how it has to be. After we ate from the Eitz Das, the nisari bara, and we became mixed up with Ra. Azay tzarech birurim. So now you have to go through a process of birurim. Ad shiafridu, till the evil is removed. And that's what it means. In other words, the process that I mentioned, that I described before, of what? Of extracting Nitzutze Kedusha from every particular moment, that's absolutely necessary now, because if you don't go through that process and you just bring light, so then it's going to that light is going to be used by all of one's kaiches, including the Eitz Hara too. So he brings down an interesting zayah. The zayah says, "Gavi Reb Acha, a ma'isa with Reb Acha, nikfar tarsha, mechaper tarsha." The Gemara says, the zayah says a ma'isa that Reb Acha shekiber b'ktoiris al makim shayin nagav. So the zayah says a story that there was this particular place where there was a plague. And Reb Acha, in order to get rid of the plague, he burnt Keteris. Not Keteris of the Beis Hamikdash, this is after, but he burnt the Keteris, some Avodah, on some level to get rid of the Negev, to get rid of the plague. For Amrulai, and it was told to Rabacha, Shloi Hoyel, that what he did is not helpful. Ki adayin b'chiyuvish takach, because the people there are still full of Averis. I mean, whatever, so he didn't fix anything. That's all Rabacha did was bring Chaim. But you're bringing Chaim to what place? To people that are mixed up with Tov and Ra. So then they're just going to continue on living, but what's being enlivened by that by Rabacha was not just the Tov, but also the Ra. Dishlan Wais and Tshuva. So if they did Tshuva and they got rid of the Ra that's inside of them, okay, fine. But now, without that, then it's impossible. And this is what the Rebbeinu Shem does to Adam. He kicks him out of Gan Eden, and by kicking him out of Gan Eden, la'avda, to do avodah, it means the hainu avodah sapirurim, aydezriya charishu ktsira, v'achakach ba'achlu imenu v'aymer echad v'yahavta u'mavara mala. So what the Baal Tanya is telling us is as follows: is that what we see from this story of Adam and Chava is the following program: that while there is a mixture of Tov and Ra within the person, let's put it this way. Let me explain. The reason why. Here, let's take a step back. Let me take a step back and I'll explain a little bit more. So until now, I've referenced this idea of this like Shemitah Dika program, right? Of somehow being able to have things early, of taking care of things early. So the way to think of it would be as follows. The Rebbeinu Shalom made us in such a way that we are stuck within the confines of time, right? That's why the concept of the Shemitah, of things, of Achishan, is beyond our ability to comprehend. We're we're in the world of Gvul. We're in the world of finite reality, right? And finite reality means it's 801, it's not 802. And if you want to get to 803, you got to wait another minute. You know what I'm saying? We're in the world of Gvul. This idea of there being the possibility of things happening early before it's time, what means the following idea? It demands a light, so to speak, entering into our world that's completely coming from above. Let me put it to you this way. There's a rule in the Sfarim as follows. It's a famous lashon, which is as follows: B'sarusa de lasata isra la'ela. That when we want something from above to come, when we want the Rebbeinu Shalom's shefa, good things, bracha and kedusha to come into our lives, the general rule is we have to initiate it down here. We have to initiate it down here. You do something down here, and it's a rusa de lasata. There's an awakening from below, and that triggers an awakening from above. Whenever that process, when you go with that program, then even the light that is triggered from above is working within the confines of limitations of below, because that's where it's starting from. So whenever we are trying to bring Kedusha and Shefa into our world, if the process is going to be initiated from us below, then automatically the Kedusha that's going to come into our lives is going to be within the program of limitation. Which means as follows, that in order for Kedusha and for Elokus to come into the world in this way of Achishana, then somehow it cannot start with us initiating it down here. Because if we're initiating it down here, it means that whatever's coming above is going to be limited to our constraints. And we are very much constrained to 801, and we're not up to 802. So if we do our avodah of 801, it means that whatever we do down here in 801, if what spiritually then happens in the universe, if it's being caused by our avodah, it's only going to be an 801 experience, even in the higher world. And so what does it mean, this idea of Shemitah, of there being this idea of things happening early? That would require the following concept, which is a light coming from above, so to speak, things happening in the world that's not dependent on us. That's not dependent on us. That's coming mamish from above. And here's the problem. If that were so what we're going to see is as follows: is that there is something. There is this idea of us being able to allow this idea of a light of there being his iris milamala of something happening, of tikkunim, of fixing, of light entering into the universe, so to speak, from above without us activating it. If that were to happen, then you're right. Then all at once, 801, 802, 803, it could all be taken care of, because the entire limitation of 801, and you have to wait till 802, that's all from our perspective. That's all lasata, that's all from below. But if there can be an isarusa de la'ela, an awakening from above, something happening from above that is not being triggered by us, but it's happening automatically, then it's not going to be limited just to 801 and 802. It could happen, it's l'malam hagvul, it could be happening all the time. It could be happening right away. Well, we're going to, here's the problem. Herein lies the problem. If that were to happen, let me give you an example, and we'll see soon. We'll speak more about this next week. But again, I'm giving a little bit early because it's a hard idea. There is a mechanism in place. There is a certain aspect of Yiddishkeit that we actually do have the ability to allow such a thing to take place. Chazal say the following lashon. Chazal say lashon that when you compare Torah versus Tefillah, Chazal say Tefillah is called Chaye Shah, and Torah is called Chaye Olam. When a person learns Torah, so Torah, you could look at it in two ways. It's a mitzvah. It's like we have many mitzvahs. We have a mitzvah that's not to wear shatnez. There's a mitzvah to learn Torah. But there's another way of viewing Torah. Torah is not only just a mitzvah. Torah is also a entire. Torah could also be seen as a system of fixing, of going through. Again, like I said, the whole purpose of Galus is to fix, is to go through page by page by page, and to work our way to Geula. There are two modes for that. There's a type of process which is a process which, again, is initiated from below, and then the fixing that takes place is automatically limited to our construct of 801, and then 802, and then 803. That's called the mahalach, that's called davening, that's called tefillah, it's called chayishah. Davening in this context means more than just davening. It means all avodah. We're going to speak about this more next week, more in detail. This is more just a general introduction, and I know that it's a little bit out there, but just bear with me. So there's avodah that is fundamentally being done by us, and the Rebbeinu Shalom is responding. That's a process of birur. That's a process of fixing, of going through page by page, of going through Golas, which is limited to us. It's limited by us, and therefore it's 801, 802. That's automatically a be'ita. But there is an Indian that's called Torah. When a person learns Torah, then then what can be accomplished in that way is not that you are triggering something and then a tikkun is happening in that moment. You are allowing into the world a light from above, a light that's happening from above. Mm-hmm. What is happening when a person learns? When a person learns, so you're just learning about what the Rebbeinu Shalom says. You're not coming up. You're trying to understand the Rebbeinu Shalom's ruts. You're just allowing the Rebbeinu Shalom's will to come into the world. Torah is a process in which a light that's above constraint and above restriction is able to do its thing, is able to make tikkunim, is able to do its thing. And because of that, it's not therefore limited to 801, 802. The process of achishana is to, instead of the tikkun, instead of birurim happening through us, just allow the light to descend from above. Let the Rebbeinu Shalom do his thing. Let a light come. So one second. Yeah, one second. Yeah. So let me just say it's like this. So when you, this is the difference between Torah and Tefillah. Now, the reason why this program that's called Torah, allowing the light of tikkun, allowing the light of the Rebbeinu Shalom to come in his terms. So on the one hand, that's an unbelievable mila, because now you're not stuck with 801, 802. It could happen quickly because the Rebbeinu Shalom is above gvul, and it's not being triggered, and it's not being initiated by people that are bali gvul. But here's the problem. The problem is exactly the problem with Adam and Chava after the sin. There's so much pollution within the human being that if it's coming without us initiating it, without us working through our inyanim of 801, of 802, of 803, then all that light comes, and it's going to give energy to the Yetzer Hara as well. In other words, so this is the problem. The problem is that the maybe I bit off more than I can chew, I'll be honest with you. But the problem is as follows: if the process of birur, of tikkun, there's two avenues in which tikkun can take place. Either it's an avenue in which it starts off with us sifting through our inyanim, of getting rid of Ra. And if it starts off with us getting rid of Ra and and we're initiating the avodah of what 801 requires. So then on the one hand, then what results from that, from above, is now going to be healthy and pure, and we're going to be able to receive it because we worked through everything that 801, everything that now 801 has been purified. We were Oymid bin Yisayim. We did our mission. We got rid of the Ra of 801, and now the Shef of 801 can come. So on the one hand, if that's the approach, so fine. So then whatever comes in 801 is Gavaldik. It's healthy and pure, and it doesn't have any spillover. But on the other hand, the only thing that's going to come to us is 801. If we're the ones initiating it, because we're stuck in 801. On the other hand, there's another approach which is called Torah, which is I'm not initiating anything. I'm just allowing the light of the Rebbeinu Shalom to come into the world. Now, if I'm just allowing the Rebbeinu Shalom's light to come into the world, then the Rebbeinu Shalom is not limited to 801. Then he, in one fell swoop, can bring a shefa, can bring light that is for 801, 802, 803, finished. But on the other hand, if it's not being initiated by our avodah of birur, of sifting through, of clarifying, of working through our inyanim, then when that light comes, it's coming to everything that everything that we have, which is both taiva and ra.
Either way, we're limited.
Either way, we are limited. Exactly. So this is the problem. So they're going to say, 1 second. So when Adam and this is what the Baal Tanya is alluding to with the problem of Adam after the sin. Adam after the sin now is forced into a cycle in which, in order to allow light into the world, it has to be initiated from below. It has to start off with Adam working through, sifting the moment, and going and being Oivin of getting rid of the Ra of that particular moment and connecting to a good, something good. And then there could be light that enters into that moment. And now you can move on to the next page. But because that's the process, and it has to be so, because otherwise the page, because otherwise there's Ra in the page. But then again, the problem is that the light that's coming into the world is only from that page, and it doesn't move on. This is the problem. So that's the issue.
Can we plug in the Cook's Varto, the Kelam Tikkun,
let's try to work through this. This is like this. So a little bit more. So he says the Baal Tanya like this. So he says like this. Then the third paragraph. Now we have to explain. Now everything I just said, he's going to read through it a little bit quick. And now we have to understand. Again, before Adam sinned, before Adam knew and internalized Ra, so so said the Baal Tanya like this, and before Adam sinned, how would the tikkun have taken place? So he says like this, it will be as follows. Before Adam and Chava sinned, the tikkun had a different possibility. It could have happened just an influx of light from above, because where is that light going to? It's going into Adam and Chava, who are people that are pure. So before Adam and Chava sinned, you had the ability and you had the right to choose the model of just being open and allowing the Rebbeinu Shalom to do his thing. That's called eating from the Eitz HaChaim. That's called eating from the Eitz HaChaim. Eitz HaChaim is called Torah, right? Eitz HaChaim ilamachzikim ba. So again, we'll speak about that maybe more next week as well. But this idea of, again, these two paths, of us initiating down here, which requires starting off with birurim, with sifting and conquering evil and overcoming obstacles and so on, that is a necessary approach now that we've sinned. But again, because of that, there's a catch-22. Now the shefa that's coming and the response from above to, after our initiation, to then allow us to move on to the next page is limited to that particular page because we're the ones initiating it and we're stuck in 801. We can't get past that. But before Adam and Chava sinned, the possibility was, as he says, Laham shecharein tzayf b'Gan Eden, just to bring light into Gan Eden, just bring infinite light, beyond 801, right? Infinite light into their world. And through such an influx of light, then automatically there would be all the sparks of every single moment would have been raised up. Shanafu v'nisavra bara, they were mixed up in evil, but as long as the evil is outside of them, then Adam and Chava are able to experience that light, and all the nitzutzi kedusha will be uplifted without having any negative effects. And all those sparks will be gathered together in this, overwhelming light that is brought, that Adam and Chava bring into the world. Now he gives an example: Kiner b'fnei havuka, like a candle in front of a huge torch. So he says like this. I never tried this out, but this is what he says: Shemavuka kitana. If you have a small torch, Azai hanera samuchla yuchlal ba. If you have a torch, he says, then a small little candle in front of it will become attached. The flames will attract. The small little flame will become attracted to the big torch. Vim yarchiku ma'at. But if the torch is only small, then if you move away the candle a little bit, then it won't have that effect. So lo yichlum b'nei shavuka ketana, because the torch is only small. Avomti avuka gedoyla, but if you have a very, very large torch, then even if the flame is with a distance, the flame of the little candle will still be schlepped towards the big torch. So that would have been the approach before Adam and Chava sinned. Allow a big light into the world, and that big light, it will gather together all the sparks that are scattered amongst time, and it'll take care of itself. And there won't be any flaws with that, because again, Adam and Chava themselves are pure. And so they could receive that light without it causing any damage. But now that Adam and Chava sinned, that approach, l'chara, is closed off. But now the Baal Tanya introduces us to the following idea: that even though Adam and Chava sinned, and that approach, as it would have been on the level of Adam and Chava, is no longer, but it's not completely out of possibility. It's not completely out of possibility. Ad kedei kach, the Baal Tanya says that there was times in history where such an approach of allowing of choosing a path of the path of Torah, so to speak, of allowing a light from above to come into the world and allowing that light to gather sparks that are beyond the limited scope of time and space that it would have been limited to if it was initiated by us. There were times in history that was still a possibility, albeit maybe not to the extreme degree as it was Adam and Chava before the sin. But to a certain degree, yes. It says the Baal Tanya like this: said the Baal Tanya, during the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, then this process, this avenue of tikkun, which is not through our own initiation, and therefore not limited to our limitations of time and space, but rather the avenue of allowing light of the Rebbeinu Shalom into the world through Torah learning, right? As we'll speak about that more next week, how exactly to do this. But allowing the light of the Rebbeinu Shalom into the world, and therefore the light being unlimited in terms of time and space, and allowing that light to gather the sparks and the candles, right? And it's like the example that he gave of a big torch. Like a huge torch just automatically attracts all the sparks from around it. So this was a possibility during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. How do I know? So it says about Tanya, Shari'or Chazal, Because Chazal say, Yisrael, Chazal say that the whole reason why we went into Golus is because we go from country to country and we gather converts. So said the Baal Tanya, the Hainu, what are these converts? It doesn't just mean physical people to become Gerim. The Hainu lahalis nitzaitzis. It means these sparks. Some sparks are found in people. But it means the purpose of Golus is to go from country to country, and these sparks are not just contained in different moments in time. They're also contained in different places on earth. So says the Baal Tanya, Umaha Yanasim Leichata. So understand, in order for Mashiach to come, we have to gather sparks, which means that there's sparks at every moment. So we have to go through time, but there's also sparks in different places. We have to go through different locations. But what would have been if we didn't do Averis and when we still had the Beis Hamikdash? So how would those sparks be raised? So says the Baal Tani, the answer is, it must be that during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, although Adam and Chava were no longer allowed to eat from the Eitz HaChaim, so even though we were cut off from that approach, but it's not completely off limits. It's off limits on the level that Adam and Chava could have done it. But now that we're not in Gan Eden anymore, on our Madrega, such a process is possible. And said the Baal Tana, the times of the Beis Hamikdash, the Avodah was allow the light of God into the world to such an intense degree that automatically the light is not limited to the constraints of time and space. And Memela, the sparks that are found at the ends of the universe, are able to be gathered by this intense light that comes in. So he says like this, and that's in fact what happened, at least to a certain degree, a limited amount. But by the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, Shlomo Melech was king, and all the nations of the world came to listen to his Chachma, and they came to Eretz Yisrael. Right, the Queen of Sheba, right? She comes and she wants to hear about Shlomo Melech's wisdom and so on. It was such a big torch by the times of the first Beis Hamikdash that light was so transcendent that it was able to gather. It was able to force sparks in farther places to be drawn to that light. So, and the reason for that is because this light that was being brought by the times of the first Beis Hamikdash was not being brought by us. It was not being initiated by us. We were just allowing it to come. Again, this is what we're saying, is that the process of tikkun and the process of uplifting spark by spark, there are these two approaches. Again, approach number one is let the Rabbanu Shalom do it. Let the light of the Rabbanu Shalom enter into the world. And when that happens, then the Rabbanu Shalom is not contending with Ra. The Rabbanu Shalom is just sending in light. And this light is so intense and so transcendent and so above the limitations of time and space that all the sparks will just be attracted to it. But here's the problem. The problem is that if the people that are experiencing this light are themselves so mixed up with Taiv and Ra, then guess what? With all those sparks being drawn to that torch, all the Eitzahars and all the Tumas are also being drawn to that torch. And so you'll have an unbelievable, an even more intense mixture of Taiv and Ra. So therefore, B'derech Klal, this approach is difficult for us. So what's the other Mahalach? The other Mahalach is the Rebbeinu Shalom is not doing it at all. We're the ones that have to initiate, and the Rebbeinu Shalom is just responding. And because we're the ones to initiate, so what does that look like? It means us mamish going through Avodah, and first and foremost Sur Meira, and then Vasei Tov, sifting through good, sifting through bad, finding that spark, isolating it, overcoming the tests and the temptations of that moment of 801, and only choosing the spark, only choosing the good. And then the Rabbanu Shalom will say, now it's you did your Avodah, the Rabbanu Shalom will send light. But now the light is only going to the spark because you've made room, you've cleared everything away. But because you're the ones that are initiating, so now the only light that's coming is a light of 801. And so this is, so in other words, what the Baal Tanya is however slowly but surely introducing us to, is that original approach of the torch approach, let's call it, right, of that huge light coming, a transcendent light, and us just not getting in its way, was, even though it was closed off after Adam and Chava sinned, but says the Baal Tanya, but not completely. By the times of the Beis Hamikdash, that was still the possibility. That was still the possible approach. And he says, and this is what we're going to experience. All the nations will follow us, and by the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, that could have happened with this torch approach. That's what would have been on a much grander and deeper scale before Adam and Chava sinned as well. But now after the sin, so now the process has to come from our initiation. Shas tzloisa, shas karva, and that's called davening. Davening is a it doesn't just mean davening 3 times a day. That's a code. That's it's symbolic of this entire approach of what? Of things starting from below. Of things starting from below, and with things starting from below, it means it begins with us isolating the good and choosing good, and then the Rebbeinu Shem responds. That's called chayisha. Life of the moment. The light that comes as a response to davening is a light that's of that particular moment. That's what's going on. But what the Baal Tanya just did introduce us to is, again, that this approach was accessible even after the Chet Eitzadas. It was accessible by the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. It was accessible at that time. Now, what's interesting is, just the last Maramuk, and we'll end with this, and Bez Hashem continue, will become more clear next week, is that Lubavitch Rebbe in this last piece, it's a whole Torah over here, but the Rebbe explains this is what was also going on in last week's parsha with the conflict, machlokes, whatever it is, between, when Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven and Chatzi Shevet and Menashe come to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, we want to be in the Ever HaYarden. So Moshe says, Moshe didn't want that. He wanted all of Klal Yisrael to be in Eretz Yisrael. What was the issue? So he says, because the Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, Chatzi Shevet and Menashe were saying that we have to remain outside of Eretz Yisrael because the sparks of Kedusha that we feel are our responsibility in this place, we have to be in this place to do it. As they said, we have a lot of cattle and so on, and this place suits us. In other words, what they were saying is that this place is where there are sparks in this place that we have to elevate. So Moshe says, okay, but go to Eretz Yisrael and bring a torch of light that's so intense, and Memela, it'll come. And Bnei Gad and Reuven were saying, we're not holding by that. We're too mixed up with, we have too much Ra inside of ourselves to use that approach. And so this was the back and forth between Moshe and Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. In other words, what we're being introduced to is the following idea, is that, and this, next week we'll go back, we'll continue with this, is that just as this approach of a torch, so to speak, is able to gather sparks from a distant place, it's also able to gather sparks from a distant time. And so we now have, at least, again, just the words. Next week we'll see more in practicality. But now at least we have the words of what type of mechanism is conceptually in place to allow an achishana. And that mechanism is as follows. Choosing a path in Avodas Hashem which is oriented towards allowing the Rabbanu Shlalem to do it himself. And not for you to initiate, but to make space for the Rabbanu Shlalem to do it. And when the Rabbanu Shlalem does it, then he is not limited to time, and he's not limited to space. And that's what's called Shemitah. What does it mean, Shemitah, practically? Shemitah means, I'm not working my field. Field means you're avodah. That means below. That means an awakening from below. Shemitah says, no, let the Rabbanu Shalom do it. And that was the approach before the Chet. And that, to a certain degree, was also the approach during the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. And that is the only approach that will allow achishana, that allows sparks to be elevated that are in distant places without having to go there, or in distant times without having to wait to those moments. But here's the problem. The problem is, that's a very dangerous thing. Because if it's happening without us first sifting through those moments, then when that light comes, it's coming to everything that's contained in those moments, including negativity as well. And so if you're holding by like an Adam and Chava before the sin, so then you're anyway pure. And that's fine. Or maybe if you're holding by the first Beis Hamikdash, or go back to the Arizal, where the Arizal said, right, you have big neshamas that are kedoshim with tahirim, and they barely have any internal struggles anyway. So all the sparks of kedusha that can be drawn, towards this light that they bring into themselves, it's all good anyway, because nothing in their in themselves is anyway mixed up with too much bad. But here's the problem, and that the Rizal pointed out, is that but if you're the average guy or the average girl and you got a lot of inyanim inside of you, then if you choose this approach of allowing light from above just to descend, then unless you wait till 8:03 and to work through the problems of 8:03, then when the light comes and it comes to 8:03, then it's coming to all the problems of 8:03 too. And so this is what the Rizal pointed out, is that if you don't have a big neshama like that, then you're very limited. So what we're going to see next week is an explanation of what the Rizal said, is that there is a way for an average Jew to do this, and that's called Kriya Shema. That's what we're going to see B'ez Hashem next week, what this means, and other Torahs that come from this, from Moshe Rabbeinu, and so on, other sugyas that come. But this is more of a general introduction. B'ez Hashem next week, I promise, I'll try to make it a little more simple and bring it down to earth and make it practical. Okay, B'ez Hashem. But should be zeichet to have it b'achishan already.